Chapter 21, in Oxford Street. In going downstairs the first time I found an unexpected difficulty because I could not see my feet. Indeed, I stumbled twice, and there was an unaccustomed clumsiness in gripping the bolt. By not looking down, however, I managed to walk on the level passably well. My mood, I say, was one of exultation. I felt as a seeing man might do, with padded feet and noiseless clothes, and a city behind. I experienced a wild impulse to jest, to startle people, to clap men on the back, fling people's hats astray, and generally revel in my extraordinary advantage. But hardly I had emerged upon the great Portland street. However, when I heard clashing concussion, and when I was violently hit behind, turning the man carrying a basket of soda water siphons, and looking in amazement at his burden, although the blow would really hurt me, I found something so irresistible in astonishment that I laughed aloud. "The devil's in the basket," I said, and suddenly twisted out his hand. He let go incoherently. I swung the whole weight into the air. I tried to get into the stream of people, but they were too thick for me, and in a moment in my heels they would be trodden upon. I took to the gutter, the roughness of which I found very painful indeed. The forthwith shaft crawling hansom dug me forcibly under the shoulder blade, reminding me that I was already bruised severely. I staggered out of the way of the cab, avoided the parliamenteur by a convulsive moment, and found myself behind the hansom. A happy thought saved me, and as I drove slowly along, I found in its immediate wake, trembling and astonished at my turn of my adventure. Not only trembling, but shivering. It was a bright day in January, and I was stark naked, and then the thin slime of mud that covered the road was freezing. Foolish as it seems to be now, I had not reckoned that, transparent or not, I was still amenable to all the weather and its consequence. Then suddenly a bright idea came into my head. I ran around and got into the cab. So, shivering and scared, the sniffing was first in the imitations of a cold, and with a bruise in the small and back growing upon my attention, and drove slowly along Oxford Street and past Tottenham Court Road. My mood was as different as from that in which I had sallied forth 10 minutes ago. And as it is possible to imagine, this invisibility indeed. Shaving a railway, and narrowly in my flight, I made up off a railway in Bloomsbury Square, intending to strike north past the museum so to get the quiet district, and now cruelly chilled in the strangeness of my situation, which so unnerved me that I whimpered as I ran. And at the northward corner of the square was a little white dog that ran out of the Pharmaceutical Society's offices, and incoherently made past the museum so to get down to the quiet street. I was now cruelly chilled, and the strangeness of my situation so unnerved me as I ran. At the northward corner of the square, I saw a little white dog ran out of Pharmaceutical Society's office, and incoherently for me, nose down. I had never realized before that the nose in this mind of a dog and what the mind is of a seeing man. Dogs perceive the scent of a man moving as men perceive his vision. This brute began barking, leaping, showing it, as it seemed to me, only too painfully that he was aware across the great Russell Street. Glancing over my shoulder, as did I so, and went some way along the Montague Street before I realized what I was running towards. Then I became aware of a blare of music, and looking along the street I saw a number of people advancing out of the Russell Square in red shirts, and a banner of a Salvation Army to their fore. Such a crowd, chanting in the roadway and scoffing at the pavement, I could not but hope but to penetrate, and dreading to go back and farther from home again, and deciding to spur of the moment, I ran up the white steps and the house facing the museum railings. I stood there and the crowd and should have passed. Happily the dog stopped at the noise of the band and too hesitated, and turned tail, running back to Bloomsbury Square again. On came the band, bawling the unconscious irony, some hymn about, "When shall we see his face?" I looked down and saw youngsters and had stopped. There were gaping at the muddy footmarks and I had left behind me in the newly whitened steps. The passing people elbowed and jostled them, but their confounded intelligence was arrested. Thud, 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 when thud, we shall see, thud, his face, thud, thud. He's a barefoot man gone up in them steps. I don't know nothing, said one. He ain't never come down again, and his foot was a-bleedin'. The thick of the crowd had already passed. "Looky there, Ted," quoth the younger of the detectives, with a sharpness of surprise in his voice, and pointed out to my feet. I looked down and saw him one dim suggestion of their outline sketched in the splashes of mud. For a moment I was paralyzed. "Why, that's rum," said the elder. "Dashed rum. It's like a ghost of a foot, ain't it?" They rushed round and saw my new footmarks flashed into being on the lower step upon the pavement. "What's up?" asked someone. "Feet! Look! Feet running! Everybody in the road except my 3 pursuers." I was pouring along after the Salvation Army, and this blow not only impeded me but them. There was an eddy of surprise and interrogation at the cost of bowling over on one fellow. I got through, and in another moment I was rushing and headlong around the circuit of Russell Square. With 6 or 7 astonished people following my footmarks, there was no time for explanation, or else the whole host would have been after me. And twice I doubled round the corners. Thrice the road began to come back upon my tracks. And then, as my feet grew hot and dry, damp impressions began to fade. At last I had a breathing space and rubbed my clean feet with my hands and got away altogether. This running warmed me to a certain extent, and when on a better courage, though through the maze of the less frequented roads I runs hereabout, my back now became very stiff and sore. My tonsils were painful and from the cabman's fingers, and the skin of my neck had been stretched by my nails. My feet hurt exceedingly, and I was lame, a little cut on my foot. And I saw the time a blind man approaching me, and fled and limping, for I feared his subtle intuitions. Once or twice accidental collisions occurred, and I left people amazed, and unaccountable curses ringing in their ears. Then came something silent and quiet against my face, and across the square there fell a thin veil of slowly falling flakes of snow. I had caught a cold, and I would do as I could not avoid the occasional sneeze, and every dog that came in sight with its pointing nose and curious sniffing was a terror to me. Then men became and boys running, and one and the others, and shouting as they ran. It was a fire. The invisible man paused and thought. Kemp glanced nervously out the window. "Yes," he said. "Go on." Chapter 22, in the Emporium. So last January, with the beginning of a snowstorm in the air about me, and if it settled on me, it would betray me. Weary, cold, painful, inexpressibly wretched, but still half convinced of my invisible quality, I began this new life to which I am committed. I had no refuge, no appliances, no human being in the world whom I could confide. To have told my secret would have given me away, made a mere show of my and rarity of me. Nonetheless, I was half-minded and accost some passer-by and throw myself upon his mercy. But I knew too clearly the terror and the brutal cruelty of my advances would evoke. I made no plans in the street. My sole object was to shelter from the snow, to get myself covered and warm. Then I might hope to plan. But even to me, the invisible man, the rows of the London houses stood latched, barred, and bolted impregnably. Only one thing I could see clearly before me, the cold exposure of the misery of snowstorm in the night. And then I had a brilliant idea. Turned down one of the roads leading from the Gower Street to Tottenham Court Road. I found myself outside Ominous, the big establishment where everything was to be bought. I did not feel safe there. However, people were going to and fro, and I prowled restlessly about until I came upon a huge section of the upper floor containing multitudes of bedsteads, and over these I clambered. I had found a resting place among the huge pile of folded lock mattresses. The place was already lit up and agreeably warm. I decided to remain where I was, keeping a cautious eye of 2 or 3 sets of shopmen and customers who were meandering through the place until closing time came. Then I should be able, I thought, to books and parcels where they came, and they awaited me. They took a lodging somewhere else, and elaborate plans to me complete a realization of the advantages of my visibility over my fellow men. Closing time arrived quickly enough, and I could not have been more than an hour after I took up the position of the mattresses before I noticed the blinds of the windows being drawn, and customers being marched toward, and then a number of young, brisk men began with remarkable celerity to tidy up the goods which remained disturbed. My first visit to the place where I had been stockings and gloves for sale. It was dark, and had the devil of a hunt after the matches, which had found at last a drawer of the little cash desk. Then I had to get a candle. I had to tear down the wrappings and ransack a number of boxes and drawers. Then I managed to turn out what I had sought. Box label called the lamb's wool pants and lamb's wool vests, then socks, a thick comforter, and went to clothing place to get trousers, a lounge jacket, an overcoat, and a slouch hat, a clerical sort of hat and brim turned down. I began feel a human being again, and my next thought was food. Upstairs was a refreshment department, and there I got cold meat. There was coffee still in the urn, and I lit the gas and warmed it up again, and altogether I did not feel so badly. Afterwards, prowling through the place in search of blankets, I had put up to, at last, the heap of down quilts. I came upon the grocery section, and with a lot of chocolate and candied fruits. One of more than was good for me indeed, and with some white burgundy, the Northart, the Doy department, which had a brilliant idea, and I found some artificial noises, dummy noises, and I thought of dark spectacles. Omniums had no optical department. My nose had been a difficulty indeed. I thought of paint, but the discovery set my mind running on wigs and marks and the like. Finally, I went to sleep in a heap of down quilts, very warm and comfortable. My last thoughts before sleeping were most agreeable, and I had sensed the change. I was in a state of physical serenity, and then I reflected in my mind. I thought that I should be able to slip out unobserved in the morning and my clothes upon me, muffling my face with a white wrapper I had taken, purchased with the money I had taken, spectacles and so forth. "You also," said a voice, and suddenly I was being forced towards a grave. I struggled, shouted, appealed to the mourners, and then they continued stonily following the service. The old clergyman, too, never faltered, droning and sniffing through the ritual. I realized I was invisible, inaudible, and overwhelming forces had their grip on me. I struggled in vain. I was forced over the brink, and the coffin rang hollow as I fell upon it. The gravel came flying after me in spedrels. Nobody heeded me. Nobody was aware of me. I made the convulsive struggles and awoke. The pale London dawn had come. The place was fully of chilly gray light and filtered round the edges and window blinds. I sat up, and for a time I could not think where this ample apartment was, with its counters. Then, far down the place, it was a brighter light of some department which had already been raised in the blinds. I saw two men approaching. I scrambled to my feet, looking about me for some way to escape. And even as I did so, my own movement made them aware of me. I suppose they saw merely a figure moving quietly and quickly away. "Who's that?" cried one. "Stop there!" shouted another. I dashed around the corner and came to a full tilt. A faceless figure, mind you, on a lanky lad of 15. He yelled and bowled him over, rushed him past, and turned another corner. And by a happy inspiration, threw myself behind a counter, and in another moment, feet went running past, and I heard voices shouting, "All hands to the doors," asking what was up, and giving one another advice how to catch me. Lying on the ground, I felt scared out of my wits. But odd as it may seem, it did not occur to me at the moment to take off my clothes as I should have done. I had made up my mind. I sprang to my feet, whipped out of the chair of the corner, and whirling to the fool who had shouted, turned, came into the another round corner, and sent him spinning up the stairs. He kept his foot long, gave a view hollow, and came up the staircase hot after me. Up the staircase were plied multi-magnitude of those bright-colored pot things. "Art pots," suggested Kemp. "Ah, that's it. Art pots." Well, I turned up the top step and swung around, plucked one of the pile and smashed it on his silly head as he came at me. "This way, policeman," I heard someone shouting. I found myself in a bedstead at a storeroom again, and the end of the wilderness and wardrobes, and washed among them. I went flat and got rid of my vest after infinite wriggling, and stood a free man again, panting and scared as the policeman and 3 of the shopmen came around the corner. They made a rush for the vest and pants, and collared the trousers. "He is dropping his plunder," said one of the young men. He must somewhere be here." But they did not find me all the same. I stood watching them for me at a time, and cursing my ill luck in losing my clothes. Then I went to my refreshment room, drank a little milk I found there, and sat down by the fine consideration of my position. In a little while, 2 assistants who came in and began to talk over business very exceedingly like the fools they were. I had heard a magnified account of my depredations and other speculations of my whereabouts. Then I fell into scheming again. At about 11 o'clock, the snow having thawed as it fell, the day being finer and a little warmer than the previous one, I decided that the Emporium was hopeless, and I went out again, exasperated in my want of success and only the vaguest plans of action in my mind. Chapter 23. In Drury Lane. "But you now begin to realize," said the Invisible Man, "the full disadvantage of my condition. I had no shelter, no covering. To get clothing was to forego my advantage, and to make myself strange and terrible thing. I was fasting, for to eat, to fill myself with unassimilated matter, it would become grotesquely visible again. I had never thought of that," said Kemp, "nor had I, and the snow had warned me of other dangers. I could not go abroad in the snow. It would settle on me and expose me. Rain, too, let on the watery outline, and a glistening surface of man a bubble, and fog. I would should be like a fainter bubble in fog. Not in London, at any rate. I went into the slums toward a great Portland street, and found myself at the end of the street which I had lodged. I did not go that way because the crowd halfway down the opposite to the smoking ruins of the house I had fired. The day was cold, with a nipping wind down the northward running streets. I walked fast to avoid being overtaken. Every closing was a danger, every passenger a thing to watch alertly. The one man I was about to pass had him at the top of Bedford Street, turned upon me abruptly and came into me, sending me into a road almost under the wheel, passing a hansom. At last I reached the object of my quest, a dirty, fly-blown little shop in the byway near Drury Lane, with a window full of tinsel robes, sham jewels, wigs, slippers, dominoes, and theatrical photographs. The shop was old-fashioned, low and dark, and the house rose above it in 4 storyways, dark and dismal. I peered through the window, seeing no one within, and the opening of the door of the clanking bell ringing, and I left it open. I walked around the bare costume stand and into a corner behind a shovel of glass, and for a minute no one came. I heard heavy feet striding across my room, and a man appeared down the shop. My plans are now perfectly definite. I propose to make my way into the house, secrete myself upstairs, watch my opportunity, and when everything was quiet, rummage out a wig, mask, spectacles, and costume, and to go out to the world, perhaps a grotesque but still credible figure, and incidentally, of course, I could rob the house of any available money. The man who had just entered the shop was a short, slight, hunched, beetle-browed man with long arms and very short, bandy legs. Apparently, I had interrupted his meal. I came forward to follow him. The noise of the movement he had stopped dead. I did so too, startled by the quickness of the ear. He slammed the house door in my face. I stood hesitating. Suddenly, I heard his quick footsteps returning, and the door reopened. He stood looking about the shop like one who was not satisfied. Then, murmuring to himself, he examined the back of the counter and peered to some pictures. Then he stood doubtful. He left his house door open, and I slipped into the inner room. It was quite queer. It was a quite queer little room, poorly furnished, with a number of big masks in the corner. On the table, it was belated breakfast. It was confoundedly exasperating thing for me, Kemp, to sift his coffee and stand watching while he came and resumed his meal. And in his table manners were irritating. 3 doors opened to the little room, and one going upstairs, one going down, but they were all shut, and they could not get out of the room while he was there. I would scarcely move because of his alertness, and there was a draught down by his back. Twice I strangled a sneeze just in time. The specular quality of my sensations and was curious and novel, but for all that I was heartily tired and angry long before I was done eating. But at last he made an end by putting beggarly crockery in the black tray in which he had his teapot, and gathering all the crumbs on the mustard-stained cloth, he had the whole lot of things after him. His burden prevented his shutting the door behind him, as he would have done. I never saw such a man for shutting doors, and I followed him into a very dirty underground kitchen and scullery. I had the pleasure of seeing him begin to wash up, and then, finding no good keeping down there, and the brick floor being cold from on my feet, and returned upstairs, sat in his chair by the fire. It was burning low, and scarcely thinking, I put on a little coal. The noise of this brought him up at once, and he could stare a glare, and peered about the room within an ace of touching me. Even after that examination, he scarcely seemed satisfied. He stopped at the doorway and took a final inspection as before we went down. There was no death expected, said Kemp. I don't know how about that tramp of mine, said the Invisible Man with an unpleasant laugh. By heaven, Kemp, you don't know what rage is. To have worked for years, to have planted and plotted, and then to get some fumbling, purblind idiot messing across your horse. Every conceivable sort of silly creature that has ever been created has been sent to cross me. If I much more of it, I shall go wild. I shall start mowing them. As it is, they've made things 1,000 times more difficult. No doubt it's exasperating, said Kemp dryly. Chapter 24. The Plan That Failed. But now, said Kemp with a side glance out the window, what are we to do? He moved nearer as his guest as he spoke in such a manner to prevent the possibility of a sudden glimpse of 3 men advancing to the hill road with an intolerable slowness, as it seemed to Kemp. What were you planning to do with the heading of Port Burdock? Had you any plan? I was going clearer out of the country, and I have been altered that plan rather than seeing you. I had thought it would be wise, now the weather hot and invisibly possible, to make for the south, especially if, as my secret was known, everyone would be on the lookout for a masked and muffled man. You would have a line of steamers and from here to France. My idea was to get abroad the run and risk of passage. Thence I would go by train to Spain or get to Algiers. It would be not difficult, and there a man might always be invisible and yet live and to do things. And I was using the ramp as a money box and luggage carrier until I had decided how to get my books and things sent over to me. That's clear. And then the filthy brute must needs try and rob me. He has hidden my books, Kemp, hidden my books. If I can lay my hands on him, best plan to get the books out of him first. But where is he? Do you know? He is in the police station, locked up by his own request in the strongest cell in the place. Cur, said the Invisible Man, but the hangs of your plans a little. We must get those books. Those books are vital. Certainly, said Kemp, a little nervously, wondering if he heard footsteps outside. Certainly, we must get those books. That won't be difficult if he doesn't know what they're for. No, said the Invisible Man, and thought. Kemp tried to think of something to keep the talk going, and the Invisible Man resumed of his own accord. Blundering into your house, Kemp, he said, changes all my plans. For that you are a man that I can understand. And in spite of all that has happened, in a cry of publicity and loss of my books, for what I have suffered, there still remain great possibilities, huge possibilities. You have told no one I am here? He asked abruptly. Kemp hesitated. That was implied, he said. No one? Insisted Griffin. Not a soul. Now the Invisible Man stood up, sticking his arms akimbo, began to place the study. I made a mistake, Kemp, a huge mistake, in carrying this thing through alone. I have wasted strength, time, opportunities alone. It was wonderful how little a man could do alone. To rob a little, to hurt a little, and there was the end. What I want, Kemp, is a goalkeeper, a helper, and a hiding place, an arrangement whereby I can sleep and eat, rest in peace, and unsuspected. I must have a confederate, with a confederate, foot and rest. 1,000 things are possible. Hitherto I have gone on a vague lines. We have to consider that invisibility by all means. All that is done not mean. It means little advantage for eavesdropping and so forth. One makes sound, it's of little help. A little help perhaps, and housebreaking and so forth. Kemp's hand went to his mustache. What was that movement downstairs? And it is killing we must do, Kemp. It is killing we must do, repeated Kemp. I'm listening to your plan, Griffin, but I'm not agreeing, mind. Why killing? What? Not wanton killing, but a judicious slaying. The point is, they know there have there is an invisible man, as well as we know there is an invisible man, and that invisible man, Kemp, must now establish a reign of terror. Yes, no doubt it's startling, but I mean it. A reign of terror. Said Kemp, no longer listening to Griffin, but at the sound of his front door opening and closing. It seems to me, Griffin, he said, to cover his wandering attention, that your Confederate would be in a difficult position. No one would know he was a Confederate, said the invisible man, eagerly, and suddenly, hush! What's that downstairs? Nothing, said Kemp. Suddenly began to speak aloud fast. I don't agree with this, Griffin, he said. Understand me. I don't agree to this. Why dream of playing a game against this race? How can you hope to gain happiness? Don't be a lone wolf. Publish your results. Take the world, take the nation at least, into your confidence. Think of what you might do with 1,000,000 helpers. The invisible man interrupted, arm extended, and footsteps coming upstairs in a low voice. Nonsense, said Kemp. Let me see, said the invisible man, advanced and arm extended to the door. And then things happened very swiftly. Kemp hesitated for a second and then moved to intercept him. The invisible man started out and stood still. Traitors! Cried the voice, and suddenly the gown opened, and suddenly down the unseen began to disrobe. Kemp made 3 swift steps to the door, and forthwith the invisible man his legs had vanished, sprang to his feet with a shout. Kemp flung to the door. As it opened, there came a sound of hurrying feet downstairs and voices. With a quick movement, Kemp thrust the invisible man back, sprang aside, slammed the door. The key was outside and ready, and in another moment, Griffin would have been alone in the Belverde study, a prisoner. Kemp's face became white. He tried to grip the handle and with both hands. For a moment, he stood lunging, and then the door gave but 6 inches, but he had got it closed again. The second time it jerked wide, and dressing gown it came wedging itself into the opening. His throat was gripped by invisible fingers, and left his hold and handle to defend himself. He was forced back, tripped, and pitched heavily into the corner of the landing. An empty dressing gown was flung on top of him. Halfway up the staircase was Colonel Ade, and the recipient of Kemp's letter, the chief of the Burdock police, and he was staring aghast at the sudden appearance of Kemp, followed by extraordinary sight of clothing tossing it empty into the air. He saw Kemp felled and struggling to his feet. Then suddenly he was struck violently by nothing. A vast weight, it seemed, leaped upon him, and he hurled headlong into the staircase. With a grip of his throat and knee on his groin, an invisible man trod on his back, and the ghostly patter passed downstairs. He heard the 2 police officers in the hall run and shout. The front door of the house was slammed violently. He rolled over and sat up staring. He saw, staggering down the staircase, Kemp, dusty and disheveled, one side of the face white from the blow, his lip now bleeding. The pink dressing gown and underclothing held his arms. "My God!" cried Kemp. "The game's up. He's gone." Chapter 25. The Hunting of the Invisible Man. For a space, Kemp was too inarticulate to make Ide understand the swift things that had just happened. They stood on the landing, Kemp speaking swiftly, a grotesque swathings of Griffin still on his arm. But presently Ide began to grasp something of the situation. "He is mad," said Kemp. "Inhuman. He is pure selfishness. He thinks of nothing but his own advantage and his own safety. I have listened to such a story of this morning and his brutal self-seeking. He is a wounded man. He will kill them unless we can prevent him. We will create a panic. Nothing can stop him. He is going out now, furious, but he must be caught," said Ade. That is certain. "But how?" cried Kemp, and suddenly became full of ideas. You must begin at once, and you must set every available man to work. You must prevent his leaving on this district. I know, said Ade. I know those books, and yes, but the tramp says he hasn't them, but he thinks the tramp has. And you must prevent from eating or sleeping. Day and night the country must be astir for him. Food must be locked up and secured. All food, for that is so that he will have to break his way into it. The houses everywhere must be barred against him. Heaven could send us cold nights and rain, and the whole country must begin hunting and keep hunting. I tell you, Ade, he is a danger, a disaster. Unless he is pinned and secured, it is frightful to think of the things that may happen. What else can we do? Said Ade. I must go down at once and begin organizing. But why not come? Yes, you come too. Come, and we must sort a council of war. Get Hops to help, and the railway managers. By Jove, it's urgent. Come along, tell me as we go. What else is there to do? Put the stuff down. In another moment, Ade was leading the way downstairs and found the front door of the policeman outside, staring in the empty air. He's got away, sir, said one. We must go to the central station at once, said Ade, and one of you get to a cab, come up and met us. Quickly, and now, Kemp, what else? Dogs, said Kemp. They don't see him, but they wind him. Get dogs. Good, said Ade. It's not generally known, but the prison officials had never hassled a man with bloodhounds. What else? Bear in mind, said Kemp, his food shows. After eating, his food shows until it is assimilated. That is hide to after eating. Good again, said Ade. We shall have him yet. And on the road, said Kemp, and hesitated. Yes, powdered glass, said Kemp. It's cruel, I know, but think of what he may do. Ade drew in the air and sharply between his teeth. It's unsportsmanlike. I don't know, but I'll have powdered glass got ready if he goes too far. The man's become inhuman, I tell you, said Kemp. I am sure he will establish a reign of terror, and he has gotten the emotions over his escape. As I am sure talking to you, our only chance is to be ahead, as he has cut himself from his kind. His blood be upon his own head.